So this is a very simplistic way of thinking about it, but there are three circles of influence in policy making, if you like. There's the politicians and the advisors sitting in their offices in the centre of government. They're the ones who actually make the decisions, or make the decisions that are available to them anyway. You've then got Whitehall, the civil service, the people who sit around the politicians and who are their sort of machine, who are facilitating their decisions by presenting recommendations, consolidating the evidence. And then you've got the wider research community. So that would include academics, certainly, think tanks, also people in the sector who take an interest in research, teacher bloggers, etc. They all have influence on policy. Obviously, the politicians themselves are usually the decision makers. Politicians don't have a great reputation. The only profession that are less trusted than politicians are tabloid journalists. And teachers are much, much more highly trusted than politicians, only second behind doctors. Most people think of politicians as being pretty unpleasant characters, being pretty in it for themselves, or not interested in finding out what works. Actually, I think that's wrong. In my experience, most politicians from all parties do have the right intrinsic motivations. They do want to make society better. And that is, for most of them, the reason why they're doing it. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because they care about their legacy. They don't want to be responsible for some massive project that turns out 5, 6, 7 years down the line to have been a total fiasco or a disaster. Politicians want to do things that work. I actually don't think the problem is with their intrinsic motivation. I'm generalizing, obviously. But they are very highly constrained by a number of factors, both internal and external. And it's really important to think through the ways in which politicians are constrained to understand some of the problems with evidence-based policy making. The first constraint is the electorate. There are lots of issues where there are big majority support for something which goes against the evidence. To take an example, on immigration, you will find majorities in polls for having zero immigration into the UK. But all the economic research on that would tell us that would be pretty economically disastrous for the country. And there are quite a few issues where that's true. And it raises another really difficult question about evidence-based policy. It has to be mixed with democracy. And it can't be seen to be anti-democratic and against the wishes of people. And there's only so many issues on which a politician can go against majority public opinion before they're going to get thrown out of office. So that's one constraint. The second is their party and the leadership of their party. If you're a minister in a Labour government, and you, on the basis of the evidence in front of you, decide that actually for profit in public services might work in a specific situation, you're going to really struggle to persuade your party, however strong your evidence base is. Likewise, if you're a Conservative minister and you're thinking, actually grammar schools really don't work and we've got strong enough evidence to say we should get rid of them, there's no way you're going to be able to persuade your party of that. So that's another big constraint. As well as your party leadership, who may have different ideas on what works to you, and there's not a lot you can do if your party leader says, this is the policy. The availability of evidence, is something I want to come to more later, but a lot of the problems you face in government, there isn't a sort of readily accessible base of evidence. You don't get to just choose in a vacuum what you'd like to do. You get crises, you have problems that hit you and you need to resolve, and you don't necessarily have a great evidence base about the best way to resolve those problems. Sometimes you just have to make a decision based on gut instinct. There's nothing else you can do. Their own biases. So every single one of us has heuristic biases that have been well covered by people like Daniel Kahneman and Dan Ariely in their books. And I certainly do. We all suffer from confirmation bias. We're much more likely to decide we agree with a study that supports a position we already held, and much more likely to pick methodological holes in a study that we disagree with, and that's inevitable. It's also worse for politicians, because if they change their mind, they've got to do it in public. They've got to do it with an opposition yelling at them, with the media telling them that they've U-turned. It's more humiliating, it's more embarrassing. If you think about how embarrassing it is for you just to change your mind to a few people you know, it's an awful lot worse in politics, and the consequences are a lot worse. And this is the big one I want to talk about, the reliance on filters. Politicians are very busy people. They don't have time to read the research themselves. They don't have time to spend a lot of time thinking about policy making. They're very reliant on the information that they get through the filters that are available to them at any given time. If all they're reading is the Daily Mail, then their decision-making ability is going to be affected by the fact that they're only getting that source of information. So their reliance on the information that they're getting from and where they get it from is absolutely crucial to good evidence-based policy making. And while I don't think that we're ever going to be able to change a lot of these constraints, they're innate to the political system. Some politicians will be better at dealing with them than others, but we can't systematically change a lot of those constraints. We can think about the way that we get information to politicians and the filters that they're exposed to. And that's sort of what I want to speak a bit more about when I talk about the other two circles of influence.